exciting adventure at Bobe's Hobby House. Sometimes they're more exciting than others. We've all got our hair combed straight and our parts are nice and neat, so we're ready to get this going. I have as guest tonight Bob Davison. Bob is a longtime judge at the Pensacola Interstate Fair.
Yes.
Probably the longest running judge that we've had. Not to say that there was a mortality rate involved, but
it used to be anonymous. The judges,
yeah, the judges, and they still are. If we have any questions tonight for the Pensacola Interstate Fair Model Exhibition judges, and we don't know the answers, then we'll blame it on the guys that aren't here, so we'll be all right with that. We would like to bring up and be sure that everybody's alert to the fact that Pensacola Interstate Fair does in fact co-sponsor the model contest with Bobe's Hobby House. And we've been doing this for a number of years, although Mr. Frankel tells me that we're one of the newer additions to the exhibition area. But we have a space in there that's about 95 feet long and about 5 feet wide, and we fill that with models of one sort and another. They include airplanes, ships, tanks, trains, rockets, figures, cars, trucks, dioramas.
Railroad.
Dioramas are kind of neat because dioramas would be a storytelling event, and those are always kind of a fun piece to come up with. We brought, I guess that's a diorama, the piece that we have in the center here.
Well, that's always a touchy point because it's a fine dividing line, Terry, and what you've got here, we've gone over this a number of times.
Let's go over it one more time.
Okay.
The one we have on the screen, would that be a storytelling diorama?
When you take the whole thing in, it is, because you have a couple of in fact, you have 3 American GIs around the reverse side of this. Can I turn it so that...
Sure, there comes one around the corner now. Yeah.
So the main difference between a diorama and a display is that a diorama tells a little bit of a story when you look at it. In this case, you have some GIs slipping up on a German command group without their knowledge.
Presumably.
Yes. So it's more than just a display of a few figures and a vehicle, and in this case, of course, a ruined building. The other 2 models we have here, over to my left, these over here, the Stuart light tank and the science fiction vehicle, I guess you'd call it. These fall in the category of what we call display ingenuity.
Okay.
They're mounted on a base, there's some scenic material applied to the base, and it enhances the display of the model. And this helps. It helps its gaining points toward a prize in the judging.
But it's not actually telling a story.
Exactly, and that's the essential difference. Sometimes you get a display base that's large enough and fancy enough, it really gets difficult to decide whether it should go in the diorama or the display category. But the essential difference is whether or not it tells some sort of a storyline in what you see on the base.
This is for the small category in the model exhibition called diorama. It's a real popular category. A lot of people really enjoy doing this. I'd like to mention early on that we have 2 divisions, a junior division and a senior division. In the junior division, you should be 16 years old or younger. And last year, I believe we had one that was 5 or 6.
We've had
a young lady that's quite young.
Yes.
So we've had some very young people. Age is not necessarily a criteria there, but we do split those 2. And in the senior division, you should be 17 or older, and we haven't had any upward discussion about that, and we've had some folks that were seniors. So we're trying to encourage all of those. Now really go after the young people, because a lot of the young people are rather bashful about it and say, my models may not be good enough. But then we have youngsters like Sam Davis and some of those guys that walk out the door with 5 or so ribbons in their hand, and they've done good. So one of the things that we have to offer in this, first of all, I should say that there's no entry fee. And if you're building models anyway, kids, come on and bring them out. You can't lose unless you're not there.
It's important to encourage the young modelers because it's an enjoyable hobby. It's something that you can do in conditions, weather conditions, or being homebound and such, that you wouldn't be able to engage in other hobbies. It's a very rewarding hobby. The research you do in researching a historical model,
right.
And of course we have the sources around here for that. examples of them, but the historical research can be very serious in some cases, where you're actually digging through old records in library collections.
Spoken like a true historian type person, right? I know that's your background, Bob.
But the main thing is to have fun. That's
yeah,
the
if
key
you're not
ingredient.
having fun, it's time to check out a new hobby.
Yes, it's not a hobby anymore if it's not fun.
Right. One of the delights in this, and Bob mentioned casually that we have a lot of reference material at Bobe's Hobby House and other places. We still encourage people to go to places like libraries and that sort of thing. So,
and not just the public library, but PJC Library and the library out at the University of West Florida are open to the public, and they have very good reference sections in both of those.
Okay, what sort of a thing would a person want to go back and make reference to? What would he do to do research?
Well, the first thing and the easiest thing to do is simply look for photographs. The Stewart book here is a special pictorial book, and I haven't checked to see if this model was based on any particular photograph in there, but the main thing you want to do, if you can, is to find a photograph of an actual in-service example of the model you're building, whether it's a model automobile or a model tank or a model airplane. It gives you ideas for things that can be added to the model which are not included in the boxed kit. It can also, in some cases, give you ideas for correcting mistakes in the kit, because a kit is not necessarily a perfect representation of what it's supposed to be.
Well, this particular Stewart was done by Carl Moss over in Mobile, and Carl has done a really remarkable job on this, not only from a modeling standpoint, but just from an everyday life standpoint, where he's got a lot of clutter. I noticed you had looked down inside of the model where you were mentioning some of the detail work.
I haven't built that kit. I haven't even looked at that kit closely for a number of years, but I know that all that detail inside is not in the kit.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the TV cameras, I'm sure, would not be able to pick it up, but he has added full interior detail where when you get up close to it and look down through the open hatches, you can see where the driver and the co-driver sit and do their work, and you can see where the commander and the gunner in the turret do their job. The radio gear is inside, the steering gear, the transmission assembly, everything is in there.
And then on the exterior, they've got all of their... I don't even know anybody that lived on a tank or anything, but this must be like one of the early RV vehicles where the guys were cruising around. I'm sure they camped out in the evening, and they're hauling all their freight on here, their tents and their backpacks and their canteens. You can see all kind of stuff.
Well, I haven't had the benefit of that type of service, but I have a friend who is in tanks in the Army, and also all the things I've read indicate that the crews practically live in their vehicle. And any vehicle, whether it's in wartime or whether it's on a peacetime exercise that might last longer than a day or two, quickly gets cluttered up. Now, in this case, of course, he's added sandbags on the front, which was a combat measure to try to combat, give a protection against certain types of anti-tank weapons. Yeah. But a lot of the things on the back, the ration boxes, the extra gasoline cans, the crew's bags of personal belongings and spare clothing, sometimes in modern times you see a couple of Coke cans on a tank, or comic books would not be terribly unusual either.
Well, I don't know.
But these
tank
things,
guys might read comic books. I suppose that's
what it said. It would not be unusual.
Yeah.
But these things give a vehicle a lived-in look. It makes it look more realistic. And a lot of these things are parts that you can buy commercially that you have in your store.
Right. Verlinden from Belgium has a tremendous number of add-on accessories for both model aircraft and tanks and automobiles now. So there are a lot of things that used to be done only by the incredibly serious scratch builder that are now available.
You can buy those parts across the counter.
Yeah, right across the counter.
Another thing, too, that is very helpful as you build kits, if you've been in this for a few months or a few years, save your spare parts, your scrap parts. It's a very inexpensive way to dig through there and dig up parts that can be used to either clutter up a vehicle like that, or if you're building a display, as we've seen out at the fair, where they build a stock car racer, for example, in a garage setting, your spare parts from other car kits can be used to add realistic clutter around the garage. Of course, we all know that a garage is a very untidy
They're
working
supposed to
environment.
be cluttered. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how that works.
Just like a model workshop.
We've got a couple of others here. These are, the scales are a little different on some of these. I've got some 35th scale and some 72nd. This particular one is done by my son Michael a few years ago. I was just reminded of that earlier this evening. It's one of those projects that I'm not going to be critical. We're kind of embarrassed about the number of projects we start and don't complete. By the way, folks, when you buy these model kits, the whole idea is to build them, not to store them. That's our intent, and we'd like to see, of course, be successful with those. But this kind of a hobby needn't take a lot of space, and it's the kind of a thing that putting it on the base, as this one is, once again, isn't necessarily a storytelling piece, but it does enhance the vehicles that are used on this. So it's a neat way to display your models. Yeah. That's one of the fun parts of going on that. We've got some other categories that include large operating type models. These would be some of the radio control models, and I've been assured that we will have a number of radio control aircraft hanging from the ceiling again this year. It's kind of a surprise because let me explain quickly that we have the model exhibition entry forms available at Bobe's Hobby House. The deadline is rolling up on us incredibly fast. On Wednesday, October 18th, between noon and 6 p.m. only, these models, whatever model you're entering in the model exhibition, must be brought to Building 2 out at the fairgrounds. Now, there's a lot of good reasoning for this. The biggest is that I don't have to transport your models if you bring them out, and I'm sure you'll be a lot more careful with them than I might have been. So bring your models out to Building 2. If you don't have an entry form, don't let that keep you from coming out there. As long as you're out there on Wednesday, next Wednesday, between noon and 6. Now, I've got to cut off at 6 o'clock because we have to rearrange the models by category so that the judges can start the judging. Now, one of the things that's an obligation to us as the host for the model exhibition is that we have everything on display and ready to exhibit by Thursday afternoon when the fair opens. So all of you who had models entered, the ribbons, whatever ribbons you win with that, will be exhibited beginning on Thursday, and this will last for 10 days. And then at the end of the contest, you come back and get your models, and that'll be on Sunday, October 29th, between 11 o'clock and 3 p.m. So any of you who happen to build models that don't have an entry form, this gives you the complete rule sheet, the category list, and on the back side it talks about the awards that are available. There is a little bit of dollar amount awards that are given to these also, but it's not so much that you could come out ahead. Usually, I would not recommend building models for profit at this level, certainly.
Frankly, I wouldn't recommend it at any level because the time you put into a model can rarely be brought back even in prizes in one of the more prestigious contests.
Captain Evans used to build some incredibly museum quality sailing ship models. Yes. And even though Bill, when he sold his, commanded what I thought was, it seemed like a lofty price when you're up over $1,000.
Until you consider the number of hours that go into it.
You're just
the main thing
hours.
You have to remember is that it's a hobby and it should be fun. And one of the enjoyments of a contest is putting your models out with others. It gives you a gauge for your own work. It spurs you on to further efforts to improve your work. It also gives you ideas for improving your work. When you see how other people tackle model problems, how they will correct deficiencies in certain kits that you know are weak, how they will, in the case like the Stewart here, how they might add things to them to make them look much more realistic. Something as simple as the way a person might weather, as he has here, the running gear, the suspension of the tank, to make it look dusty.
I've been told tanks are always dusty.
It's even better if you can meet the modelers and speak to them, but even if you can't do that, just seeing what other people are doing, it's always a tremendous advantage to improving your own work and your own enjoyment.
Well, I have noticed as we come along here that we have that shallow entry time from noon till 6, that a lot of the modelers kind of hang around waiting to see what else is coming and who's bringing it, and then a lot of questions about how they did it. Stick around for just a moment. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about how to exhibit models at the Pensacola Interstate Fair. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and we're still talking about displaying models at the Pensacola Interstate Fair. Remember, the deadline is rolling in fast. It's next Wednesday. By 6 o'clock, we have to cut it off. It's all over by then. Bob, you brought in a couple of figures at this time. We were just talking about those in the break. We have a category for figures,
yes.
and I think one of the things that I wanted to invite was the comparison between eyes, doing eyeballs. Now, here's your fantasy figure. I want to tell people, first of all, that this is a scratch-built piece that Bob built. That's not a kit, and I find that just stunning. But the facial expression, again, the closer you get, the better she looks.
Put your hand by it to show the size.
Yeah, put your hand by it, yeah. She's not very big. And it works pretty good all the way around.
The reason I brought the figures was not so much to advertise a figure category, but because people use figures to bring life to their models, like mechanics with a model car, or military figures such as this one over here next to it, of Field Marshal Rommel in this particular case, but figures of this size and scale to put with the tank models. And one thing about figures is they're a two-edged sword in that, believe me, painting miniature vehicles and painting miniature figures are two different skills. I've done both, and they're very different in the way they're tackled. I would recommend to a person, if they want to put a figure with a model, to make sure that the figure is at least as well done as the model. Otherwise, it would likely detract from the kit and should not be included with it.
Okay, we mentioned eyes specifically, and I think psychologically, when we look at figures, one of the things that we look at is eyes.
Yeah, well, that's one of the two hardest things to do if you're tackling figures for the first time. If you've got experience in the model airplanes and model tanks and model cars, the two hardest things to do in a figure is to get a believable skin tone and to get believable eyes. Too many people overdo the eyes. They make them too large, and they show a lot of white around the iris.
If we can look at the eyes on this this other diorama.
You volunteered for this, Terry.
I'm volunteering for this. These are figures that I painted myself, and if you see their eyes head on, you can see how broad the whites are in their eyes and how staring. Actually, I could tell you that I did this deliberately because these guys haven't had much sleep, and if I should have made them bloodshot, maybe that would have been. But these eyes are really quite large, and they're what I would refer to as the fried egg eye.
Okay. There's a contrast here. The thing about the Field Marshal figure, if I can get an angle so his face comes out from under shadow in the bill of his cap, if you can get this one. I'll lean him back so the light gets into the face more. The face is very simply done. It's simply one base skin color and then one shade of brown used to shade in the mouth and the cheekbones and the other facial features. And then the eyes are simply shaded in. There's no white and no iris to them at all. One of the best things I recommend to people who are trying to tackle figure painting.
Look at the plaid neckerchief in there.
Well, that can
People
get kind of complex,
plaids.
but you don't have to do that.
Okay.
The thing I recommend to people is look at photographs in ordinary magazines, advertising photographs, for example, of people where the photograph is taken from sort of a middle distance, outdoors, and you get an idea for how the facial features shade and highlight in the natural sunlight, and the eyes tend to squint. And so if you look at those photographs, if they're slightly blurred photographs, all the better yet, because you lose a little bit of detail and you tend to concentrate on the essentials.
Right.
But
so in many cases, those will only be shadows and might be accomplished even by a wash technique. Is that feasible?
Possibly, but in this case, usually the best technique is to pick a slightly darker shade of brown that is a fairly close tone match for the flesh tone you're using. Brush it under the cheekbone. For example, if you were, as on the figure of Rommel there, if you were to brush it under the cheekbone and then dip the brush in paint thinner, whatever brand of paint thinner and paint you're using, and wipe the brush off against a cloth so that it's slightly damp. And then you can go back and brushing around the areas of the shadow color, you can soften those edges. That's the
Okay.
simplest way to shade a figure. And in most cases, it's really all you need to do.
I would like to point out that all of the judges that we use are in fact model builders. Each of them seems to have different area of expertise. I had a horrible lesson one time having a judge who is not a model builder, and I'll never do that again. So these are people who understand what to look for in the models, and we'll be going through those. Once again, as our life runs through as quickly as a flash here, I would like to point up a couple of things in materials that we stock at Bobe's Hobby House. One of my favorites is this Celluclay brand paper mache.
You can cover a whole model railroad layout in that stuff.
You can cover a model railroad layout with this, and I'm going to do that, in fact, while we're talking to line 1 here. Hi, you're on Bobe's Hobby House.
Yeah, I had a question
Sure.
as far as the displays. Do you have a size limit on a display?
It says that the maximum size of the diorama should not be excessive. We've been kind of nebulous about that with some deliberateness. For example, we had a fellow some years back who had a small model of a ship and a 4x8 foot sheet of plywood painted blue. That really didn't make a good diorama. It took up a lot of space. So I like to keep the dioramas fairly compact and provide opportunity for as many people to participate as we possibly can.
Yes, that answers the question. I just had a F4E Phantom that's about 2 feet long.
Great. We will have some large models out there, and I want to encourage those.
Okay.
But,
Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks for the call. Yeah, let me take just a second here. I have mixed up this tasty-looking stuff is some of that same Celluclay, and it looks really, really nasty. It always reminds me of Mr. Williams. But if you'll notice, those people who are doing school dioramas, and we've got a lot of people building Indian villages and other history projects, but you can take this stuff, and I'm using a popsicle stick, and the twig that you see on here is actually an azalea trimming that I've used to make a stump from a tree. And we're just using this for ground cover. I would encourage those of you who use this stuff to keep it thin, because this is going to take 2 or 3 days to dry. But it dries very nicely light. It's very quick. It's good material. You can make foot tracks in it or tire tracks or whatever.
Yeah, you can take a pair of wheels on an axle and just roll it back and forth through it to make a rutted road in almost any scale.
Yep. Some of the folks have done that here. Okay, we've tried to bring to you tonight some of the techniques that you can present a more exciting model display, whether you compete in the fair or not. If we can encourage you to come out to the fair, we'd like to do that. If you just enjoy the hobby, we'd like to encourage that too. At Bobe's Hobby House, we have a lot of material for use in building models. We also have miles and miles of ribbon if you need a place to put ribbon. We have a large selection of arts and crafts, of which right now we have a sale going on through I believe it's the 5th of November. A sale catalog is available for you. We have a class schedule available for you at no charge, and the fair entry form. So if you have any hobby questions, curiosities, or whatever, give us a call at Bobe's Hobby House, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Remember the old neighborhood